And I thought for the purpose of this, well, I have to get down because I wanted to show you this spreadsheet. Unfortunately, the way we've automated this tool is fairly primitive technology called Excel spreadsheet. It's obviously it's something that lends itself to being provided as an automated app, perhaps. So any volunteers who want to put in the effort, we will gladly welcome you. Can you put that spreadsheet on display in a way that I can fiddle with it? Okay, I'm not going to go through all the detail.
Do you want it on screen? Do you want it on screen?
I just want to use the spreadsheet. What are you showing me now? Put the spreadsheet up.
Do you want it on the screen?
Yes. Oh, you must kill the presentation first, I think. There we go. It's starting to show. Okay, I'm not going to go through the detail. It has a fairly primitive set of instructions at the beginning, but perhaps just some of the highlights. The first thing that is vital when we use this tool is to confirm the scope of the endeavor, which is done on the Scope Setup tab. Now, that's where, essentially, the first thing I want to say, in using this assessment tool for startup companies, that we basically acted on the assumption that they are either ready with their minimum viable product to go to market, or they're already in business. What Kolile demonstrated in how to use Essence was the way that a person would use it in support of the execution of a project, whether, be it an agile project or any other method that's being applied. But for this purpose that we're now trying to demonstrate today, we've said that we assume that the life cycle of the product development has come to a point where it is either ready to go into use or is already in use. So therefore, the first thing that had to be considered was which of the alpha states of each alpha will be part of in scope for the assessment. And I'll demonstrate that a little bit in a moment. Then the scoring, in fact, the scoring scheme has improved or developed a little bit since I wrote those instructions. But every one of the checklist items that Kolile spoke about is scored according to a 0, a 0.5, a 0.9, or a 1, where 1 means that that checklist item has been sufficiently satisfied to fulfill the needs of getting that minimum viable product ready to go to market, or accepting that it is already in production and therefore it is a success. So it's like 1 is perfect score, but it's not scoring against any hypothetical industry best practice. It is scoring, and that's of course where a lot of subjective judgment has to be applied. Basically in the interview where the assessment is conducted, at this stage I'm the main assessor, I make the call as to what the entrepreneur describes to me, whether I feel that was done sufficiently well to serve the initial start of his business. When I had one entrepreneur, and I'll show you the results of that assessment in a moment, there was one fellow who persuaded me to give him full score on every one of the checklist items, because I told him that it was a matter of saying, was it good enough for you to get into business? And then afterwards I realized, well, that's no good, because in my reports that I produce, I only report on the items that have scored less than 1. And therefore, in that case, I wouldn't have had anything to report. So that's why I introduced the comma 9 score, which says, satisfactory to achieve the initial purpose, but needs to be rethought for the way forward. Any startup business can get there in quite creative ways, but if they don't learn from their success and don't grow into the space that their success has created, they can just as easily fail on the back of success. And therefore the 0.9 was intended to give advance warning. As your business grows, you better think about doing this more formally than what you've done it in the past. And the 0.5, so the 0.5 and the 0 was the kind of the initial thinking. 0, oh, I never even thought of doing something like this. So I don't get any score. 0.5, yes, we did something along these lines, but we could have done it better. And then a 0.5 is scored, and the other two as I've described. Okay, I think that's enough for the instructions. If I just show you the scope setup screen, there are the 7 alphas. Let me just get the screen a bit bigger. And then, all we do literally, I mean, for most of them, it's really the last 2 alpha states that are applicable. If the startup has not yet gone into business, it's unreasonable to assess the startup against benefit accrued because the solution is not yet in use. And then I would typically, I don't know if this keyboard will do what it has to do. Let's see, where's the 0? So I typically make that a 0, which then takes that alpha state out of scope, but the alpha itself is still to be measured. Similarly with stakeholders, which the journey ends up with satisfied in use, well, the stakeholders can only be satisfied once they're actually using the product. Fulfilled, similarly, for requirements being fulfilled, those are requirements that are in use, demonstrated by the actual successful use of the system. That would typically be a 0. The software system, well, the retired alpha state is a bit of an interesting one that SEMAT, or that Essence provides, essentially saying that, the ultimate end of the life of any software product is when it becomes retired. Well, for a startup business, we're not really thinking of retiring the product, so that's obviously out of scope. And then the operational state would also be if it was not yet an implemented solution. And then, for reasons I will briefly describe, I actually also, in the interest of saving time, I take all of the alpha states of the team and of the other 3 endeavor alphas out of scope. This is quite something to work on a new keyboard with behind your back almost. Anyway, you get the message, I think, but I'm going to complete it just for the sake of perfection. And then the last one is not on display. And essentially, when this scope setup has been done in agreement of the entrepreneur, it would be say, right, that has now set the scene for the assessment. The reason I take these 3 alphas out of scope in most cases is because, number one, the assessment is quite time consuming. In order to go through the 5 states of the remaining alphas, the 4 of the software system, to go through that whole assessment usually takes about 2.5 hours. And for a person who's not previously had any exposure to SEMAT Essence, a person who perhaps has not got too much background in the world of software development, a 2.5-hour session thinking and hearing about all the things that the kernel suggests need to be attended to is quite a tiring process. So that's why I don't want to make the session any longer. And then, of course, the other reasoning, and though this one is a little bit flawed, is to say, well, you've got your minimum viable product either ready for use or in use. So it's going to be of less value to look back and say, how the team performed, how the work was done, and what way of working was applied, because that's history. It's over and done. You are now standing at the beginning of a new stage. Of course, if the entrepreneurial business is going to use the same team to take the next step for the next journey, then my argument that it's not important falls away. And therefore, it might well have been value-adding to include those alpha states in the assessment. Anyway, we then, once the scope has been set up, we move to the actual scoring, which is literally just the spreadsheet emulating every one of the cards that Kolile's presentation was showing. Here's the opportunity that starts out in the identified state, moves to the solution needed, to the value established, to viable, to addressed, and then if it is full scope, to benefit accrued. My spreadsheet is a little bit smart for the opportunity alpha because you'll notice that here the checklist items are not on display because that alpha state was taken out of scope. Therefore, there's no need to ask the questions that those checklist items deal with. The same should have held for all the other alpha states that have been taken out of scope, but the spreadsheet still needs to be enhanced for that to work throughout the spreadsheet. Anyway, so that you'll see. And then, for every checklist item that is assessed, a score is given. 0, 0.5, 0.9, or 1, and that, of course, results in a calculation which gives a score. For those who are interested in this in more detail, you'll notice that there's a weight attached to every checklist item. This is a real research topic for anybody who's interested in maybe a PhD level would be worth getting these answers in a more scientific way, because there's no doubt in my mind that these checklist items are not of equal weight throughout the whole assessment tool. Some things are far more significant than others. At the moment, just for simplicity, because there are 3 checklist items, they each have the same weight. But that's a future project that, as I say, I keep offering it to people to say, does somebody not want to really apply their minds to this research? So far, I've had no takers. Okay, so that's the spreadsheet. The results get displayed automatically on a radar diagram, and that's what I'm going to be showing you in the rest of the presentation, is a number of examples of the results of having completed the assessment on various startups. Thank you. You can take us back to the presentation. That is the end of your time. I think I'm busy making up for your speedy presentations. But we won't go over time. That's not on the cards. So we've got 40 minutes left. If the bell rings again, you'll know I've said too much. Or you've asked too many questions. I mean, you are welcome to do that, of course. Okay, so I'll take it from here. Thank you. Let's just quickly whip through this again. So now we're actually, whoops. This is, what is going on? Where am I? So Essence, the safety net, the tool. I've shown you all of this, and I've demonstrated the use. Now we will show you results of various assessments. Okay, the graphics are a little bit blurry, but it doesn't matter. The key things to see, obviously, are the blue line, which is the 100% score, and then the red line, which is the achieved score. This particular startup, you will see there's a percentage, the overall endeavor percentage score, which is 84%. I haven't yet done enough. I've done about 17 assessments on startups, and then a whole lot of other assessments on other systems from the Department of eGov at Gauteng Province. But not enough evidence yet to start putting any special meaning into the actual percentage that he scored. But the gaps are the things that are interesting. In this case, we've got a startup called Kazi Eats, offering a kind of a Mr. Delivery service in the township. Something else to mention, perhaps, is that because of the sponsorship of the Department of e-Government at our technology hub, we are asked to focus on startups that have the probability of contributing to the development of township economies. So Kazi Eats is a person who's realized that these established Mr. Deliveries and Uber Eats and so on are not yet servicing the township market. And so he's made it his business, based on his own personal contacts with restaurant owners, to start providing a Kazi Eats in the township. He's already operational. The type of system, or the minimum viable product, is obviously an app, and then the back end that is associated with it. Now, this is one of our best examples of how the business model canvas, this fellow, when he did whatever has been done to get them to the point where they are, was totally unaware of SEMAT Essence. But they used the business model canvas actively in trying to define their business, to start up their business. And you'll see, therefore, the gap between the achieved score and the perfect score for stakeholders and opportunity was quite small, but for requirements and for software system, it was much larger, which immediately illustrates how, for this particular entrepreneur, Essence could have been a safety net that could have helped them, let's say, attend to many more of the essential things that are needed to ensure the success of a software system. The next one, TPS, interesting company called Technological Plumbing Solutions. Okay? You'll see that the type of system, I've called it Internet of Things, because their business is about deploying sensors that can measure water levels and so on, geyser leaks and that kind of thing, and then automatically alert service providers to come and attend to problems and stuff like that. So that's why they're plumbing solutions. They were first in the plumbing business, and they've now started to implement technology ideas to actually enhance their business. In this case, also production ready, not yet an operating. The business exists, but this line of business was not yet active. And notice the gaps here. You see here, they were less active users of the business model canvas. So immediately the kind of questions that Essence was asking about, how have you addressed your stakeholders, how have you addressed the opportunity, there was a lot more lacking. And then you can see in terms of requirements for a software system and the software system itself, well, that was the reason they weren't yet live in actually running this, because the system to collect the data from the sensors that would be located wherever they were monitoring water leaks and that kind of thing, that system was not yet ready. So in a way, one could argue that this was a premature assessment, but on the other hand, it obviously gives the entrepreneur a lot of advance warning, and the report that is produced gives a lot of suggestions as to how important things can still be done in order to make sure that the rollout of the system is a success. The next one is Bookie app, even stranger profile. A very ambitious entrepreneur, this I must say. Once again, they were assessed from the perspective of being production ready, but these large gaps, look at the software system, effectively show that it was again from the perspective of saying, are you ready to go live? It was too early to be asking those questions. So therefore for them, the value would again have been early warning about things that still have to be done. And in this case, a lot of really significant risks were identified. They were not really driving their own. Their solution involved deploying electronic books to universities on a large scale to basically take away the burden from students of having to buy their own books. But there were some key assumptions that the use of the business model canvas might have got them to think through, and it might have changed their view of their business altogether. For instance, there is evidence that students actually don't like e-books. One of the reasons being, if you buy a hard copy textbook, and at the end of your year you've successfully passed that subject, you can sell your book and earn a bit of money back. What do you do with an e-book that you've used for a year? Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing, of course, is that when universities have open book exams, well, to the best of my knowledge, certainly at Wits University, it is not yet possible to take an e-book in as your textbook because of all the risks associated with that device being able to connect to the outside world and be much more than just the textbook that you have as assistance for the exam. We actually tried to address that problem formally at the beginning of last year, and we could not come up with an affordable, simple solution to allow electronic devices to be used as reference material in an open book exam. I don't know if any university has cracked that in an affordable way. I'm sure with the use of technology one can prevent connectivity and all these kind of things. But as a simple solution, not yet allowed. So they've got some key assumptions based on related to the opportunity. Even the stakeholders, they had vague ideas about some of the parties who should be involved with them to actually solve some of these problems that I've explained. And they hadn't really even properly engaged with them yet. So, they hadn't really got their opportunity properly understood, and therefore what they were focusing on was the app that would be used by students, which is fantastic. But of course, if there's no substantial and sufficiently well-performing back-end to the app, it would be pointless. So this one has got a lot of work still to do. Another one, which is an interesting case, Atinov, again an Internet of Things kind of solution. At this stage, it was just a prototype. What he's an inventor, the fellow behind Atinov. He's not a business person. He's not an entrepreneur. What he needs is an entrepreneurial partner to take his really excellent ideas and to actually, get them to succeed as a business. In this particular instance, the product that we were evaluating was a smart streetlight that could serve all sorts of purposes. It could be a wireless hotspot. It could be a temperature detector. It could be an air pollution detector. I forget, there might have been a few other elements to the concept. And this would automatically be collecting data wherever the streetlight is deployed and make it obviously more possible for the authorities to manage the situation. Even a smoke detector, if there's a serious fire near the streetlight, it could raise the alarm and all this kind of stuff. Really good stuff. But as I say, he was so focused on the invention and trying to perfect the prototype that he hadn't got around to thinking who he should be talking to create business for this idea. And what was the real opportunity? What was it worth? Was it real or was it just imagined? And a lot of other things about that. From the perspective of the requirements in the software system, once again, he had so much focused on the sensor side of the solution that the integrated system that would have to be created to make these smart street lights actually have someone to talk to and where the data would be collected and so on was still not getting attention. Then we get Varsity TV, operational, a collaborative website. Varsity TV is an organization that has now been in existence for a few years. One of the members, well, a number of these that I've spoken about are members at Tumolochong, our innovation hub. These fellows are in business, and their business model is to basically have a on-campus news network, or let's call it information provision, where they have flat-screen devices in the canteen, and they basically on their website collect information, post-produce it, and publish it for the students. They know the student market well. Their business proposition is based on the idea that companies who want to somehow get access to the student market can basically work with them, and because they understand what it takes to successfully communicate with students. Now you'll see there the gaps between the perfect score and what they achieved were quite small. The overall score was 96.4, and there was far less that came out of that assessment. There were some things, the requirements. They spoke about their intention to deploy their solution. They are already on a number of campuses, but all in Gauteng, and they basically want to go national. And therefore, again, exactly what was needed to achieve that is maybe still needing more serious attention, and the software system itself would have to be brought up to scratch to actually do that. But you can see, near perfect score is not impossible. Another one, Menjik, again, an app and the back end. These fellows are trying to promote literacy and numeracy in young people, young children throughout the country. This is not the bill that I was speaking about. Sorry, I thought I'd actually muted this sort of stuff. Okay, so numeracy and literacy, that's really ambitious. They basically want to provide this in any of the official languages, and really I think their main problem is, as much as what they've already produced is very impressive, they're at risk of losing focus because the overall goal is very, very broad. And therefore you can see that their score for opportunity was somewhat less than what the stakeholders' score was, because it's not an opinion that I form before the assessment. I mean, I usually know very little about these startups when the assessment starts. They provide me with some minimal documentation, maybe a website reference. This is not allowable. Sorry, I don't quite know how to get it to keep quiet completely, but I think if I turn it, I hear, now you can see why we were sitting on the podium, because it's quite a nasty step to get up. Okay, so Menjik, as much as what they were doing was really impressive, you know, a few lessons to be learned around maybe focusing the opportunity for the next phase of their business. This one, Airbuy, another interesting case, another one of our member companies. These fellows have got an idea that, I'm scared to talk too much about it because they're afraid of that other people can run away with their idea, which is a fear that many entrepreneurs have. But the evidence seems to suggest that, one should be less fearful about sharing your idea, because it's really not the idea that it makes the difference. It's the execution on the idea. And therefore, you can maybe, I'm not suggesting one should just spread all your ideas across the world, but be less concerned about that and more focused on the actual execution. And in fact, that's possibly the risk that these fellows are taking, because they don't want to take their idea into a live solution because they're fearful that somebody else will grab it and run away with the idea better than they can, and then it will sort of prevent their business from being a business. It's essentially using airtime to make purchases. It's almost like an alternative currency, airtime, and they've gone a long way. Their solution is very well developed, but some of the key gaps in sort of really having the courage to say, well, let's grab the opportunity. Let's really know who we're going to offer this to our stakeholders, have left them, let's call it, not getting completely ready to go to market with their product. And the assessment has shown that up. And I mean, that's now, they're going to have to get the courage to say, we believe this idea can fly, let's do it. Because if they keep postponing, they might just find that the opportunity has gone elsewhere. This is the one that I spoke about, who convinced me to give him a full score across every alpha that I assessed. And then I went back and I said, but some of the things are indicators that for the future, you need to do this better than you've done it thus far. So his score ended up as 99.2, so that I could have something to write in the report. Explore Ikazi is again a capability that exists. It's that's one of the things about these entrepreneurs who are focusing on the township economies. Many of them have got ideas that are not new, but because their niche market is an untapped market, there's a great opportunity there for them. It's probably just temporary. As Kazi Eats becomes successful and Uber Eats becomes aware of their success, what's the most likely thing to happen? One of two things. Either Uber Eats will buy them out, which will be a happy outcome, I guess, or they will sue them, because there may be all sorts of patents or licenses or what other things that are being violated, which will be the unhappy outcome. And the same with Explore Ikazi. It's not a unique app, but it is so successfully addressed to the township community that the people are comfortable using it, whereas another one that is maybe more focused. All Explore Ikazi does is to say this app allows you to explore the townships. If you want to find a hairdresser, that's how the fellow explains how he got this idea. He was going to attend either a wedding or a funeral in a different part of the country where he used to live, and in a township. And he needed a haircut, but he thought, oh, well, I'll leave it until I get there and I'll have it done, because he knew that environment well. When he got there, the hairdresser or the barber or whatever they're called in the township, the spaza cutter, what is they called? Had closed down. The fellow was not in business anymore. And so suddenly the entrepreneur had this, it's almost like where Uber started, where this person was so frustrated waiting for a taxi that the idea for Uber was born. Well, he was so frustrated now trying to find a barber to have his hair cut that he realized, if only I had an app that I could search for barbers, or whatever they call them, in the township, I could have solved my problem quickly. And that's where Explore Ikazi came from, and it's doing quite well. You can, if you're interested, I'll give you the URL, but I'm sure if you just Googled, you'll probably find it is a known capability. And then the last one that I want to show you is just to demonstrate what happens if one does do a full scope assessment. I mean, in this case, this was for a GIS system for the Office of the Premier. This is not a township entrepreneur or anything, but because I've limited the assessments for the township entrepreneurs to just the 4 alphas, I felt, well, you need to at least see one example of assessing all the alphas. Well, this one has got some interesting lessons to be learned as well. It's an interactive GIS. It's almost like Google Maps, but of course it is specifically now for the province with all sorts of specific requirements that something as generic as Google Maps can't provide. But you'll see their score was excellent. Now, there's also a lesson in the outcome of this assessment. And without again saying too much, my experience in assessing the projects that the province has run, in general, the assessment shows quite significant gaps in terms of what was done versus what could have been done. But this one is showing almost no gaps. And I discovered the reason for this is because this particular contract had been outsourced. And it was a commercial company that did the work. And immediately the assessment showed that most of the essential things that Essence Kernel suggests should be done had been done satisfactorily. Which, of course, is another illustration that one way that an organization, let's say, that doesn't have own capability to do things as well as they would like to do them, can solve their problem by subcontracting to a capable organization. There are, of course, lots of risks associated with that. But in this case, for instance, I suspect that what happens is the capable organization who receives the contract almost manages the project on behalf of the province. And therefore, in order to get paid and live up to all the tender requirements and so on, they do a job as well as it needs to be done. Of course, that can't be guaranteed. I'm not saying there aren't risks associated with it, but it illustrates that if you don't have the capability yourself to do everything that Essence suggests needs to be done, well, then one way of approaching it is to say, let's get a successful contract in place and depend on an organization that has better capability than what we have. And that pretty much wraps up the feedback. We've shown you in this journey, first of all, the business model canvas, which, again, in the context of an agile conference, the business model canvas is a very agile tool that does not require reams and reams of planning documentation to be produced. It's a single sheet with its 9 sectors where all the key aspects about an opportunity can be described and developed. As Kanya alluded to, the canvas is not something that you produce once and say, there's my strategy, now let's go and execute. In fact, the canvas is expected to be changed very, very regularly in a similar way perhaps to what an agile software project accepts and embraces change. The business model canvas says, make the best assumptions you can, get out of the building, go and test your assumptions, and as soon as you learn from your prospective market what is likely to happen, come back and revise your assumptions. And only when that process shows some stability, that your assumptions are starting to hold and that the planning sounds to be feasible, are you really ready to say we can now become serious about making this a business? Well, in a similar way, Essence that Kolile presented is shown as a very much an agile tool that can be used by a team of software developers to regularly take stock of, are they addressing the essential things that are needed for a product to be successful, and if not, keep applying it iteratively. The one thing that this tool that I've introduced makes possible is that whereas the way the theory says Essence should be used is a kind of a sequential process. Monitor the state of your project, look where checklist items are fully satisfied, that's your current state, identify the next state as your target state, and then put in place work to be done to achieve the target state. It suggests that all the alphas should be progressing in a step-by-step staged way. The spreadsheet says, you know what, in a truly agile situation, things may be happening across the alpha all the time. You may be satisfying some of the future alpha states while you're still working on some of the earlier ones. And using the tool the way I'm using it for these entrepreneur assessments basically says, let's look at everything that is at stake in trying to get where we are and see what the gaps are. So it's really a very suitable tool for dealing with the reality of an agile environment. And then we finished off by showing you those examples, and I mean, I couldn't show you the full detail, but those gaps are quite meaningful. They tell a story, and I hope that you've been able to benefit from that. Thank you. If there are any questions, we'll handle them. Otherwise, we've done what we wanted to do.